So Young, I'm really worried about city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles because of the rising crime. How about you?
Well, I've been a witness to a lot of things that's going on these days, especially when you hear what's going up north, and it seems to be spreading down south as well. Yeah, I've been concerned a lot about it for the last 4 or 5 years. I think ever since the pandemic, it's gotten worse gradually, and nothing's being done about it.
Yeah, even rapper 50 Cent, I think he said Los Angeles is done. Did you know that? In July, he said that. So that's a shame. Well, we have LA County District Attorney Candidate John McKinney here. Nice to meet you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
Yep, great to be here.
Yeah, and he has a huge fan base in the Korean community as well. Because you endorse Richard Kim?
Yes.
Back when was it? Like around this time, was it?
Oh, just a few months ago. Last fall.
Because Richard Kim was running for
he ran for city attorney.
LA city attorney position, and right now he
is the chief of their criminal division.
Yeah, that's not bad, right?
That's great. Mm-hmm. He's the number 2 person at the city attorney's office.
Yeah, and John, I went to your website, campaign website, and about John, right? And I clicked that. It's super long, your life story. I read all of it from beginning to the end.
Oh, thank you.
And that was the first time I felt, usually I prefer short biographies, but that was the first time I went to somebody's website, campaign website, and said, you have to make it long. You have to make it detailed. Because now I think I kind of get the idea of who you are, I just met you during press conferences, prior to today's podcast show, but you made a good decision on that. You said you had to fight for that?
I had to fight for it. There are people on my team who thought it should be a short bio. They didn't think people had the attention span to read a long bio. But I think it tells my story in good detail, and it's autobiographical. I wrote it myself.
You wrote it yourself.
And so if you read it, I think my voice comes across, when I'm talking about my sister and my neighborhood and how I was raised. That's all me. That's no paid writer or anything like that.
And your mom and dad passed away very young?
Yes, my mom passed away when I was 2 years old, so I have no real recollection of my mom. And then my dad died when I was 5. Now, I do remember my dad. And from that point on, I was raised by my sister, who raised me. And she had been married with 3 children, but she had gone through a divorce right before my father died. So she went from a married mother of 3 to a single mother of 5 children.
That's lots of trauma, in your childhood, right?
It is, and it could have been worse if I didn't have my sister. She's really just an extraordinary person, and she could have just given up. She could have gone on welfare and got food stamps, and we could have lived like that. Instead, she went to work. She had already been working, but she worked harder. She worked 6 days a week. She's a very proud person. So although we probably qualified for all kind of government help, she didn't take it. She worked through sickness, and she really served as a great example for me and the rest of our family.
So this was in the East Coast, right? Jersey, yes. I believe, right?
New Jersey.
That's
so,
right.
I mean, growing up in the area, a single mother with 5 children, unattended children, I mean, there's so many ways that you could go.
Oh, absolutely.
But you chose the right path. I mean, how were you able to do this? I'm sure there was a lot of temptations around you, kids around doing other things to make money or whatnot.
Absolutely. I say there were a lot of attractive nuisances around when I was growing up. And really the main temptation was, because this was during the mid-'80s when crack cocaine hit our cities and devastated our neighborhoods. And in my neighborhood, you were either a drug addict or you were a drug seller. There were very few of us who were neither one. Most of my friends ran to the block and started slinging dope and making a lot of money. And, we were relatively poor kids growing up. So all of a sudden, when you see your best friend making $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a week,
it's very tempting.
It's very tempting. And it's not just a one-time temptation. It's every day. Every day you go outside, you see him in new clothes, a new car, gold chains, girls all around him.
So
and for a young man, that's it's hard to not join him.
How did you protect your mindset?
From
all that temptation.
I credit 2 things, and these are the tried and true things that work. It worked then; it'll work today if we have them. You got to have a certain moral code.
Yeah.
Right. That comes from how you are raised in the house. The culture of your home, the values that you are taught. And although my sister worked sometimes 8-10 hours a day, she had certain standards. We went to church. We learned how to be good people. So I had that ingrained in me. But I also had a healthy fear of the police and the courts. I didn't want to get caught because I knew there was going to be consequences. I needed both of those things to keep me from doing that.
I think this is a very big point, what you just said right now. Just what you said, consequences and having a healthy amount of fear of the court system and the consequences that come with committing crimes.
That's right. And we don't have that today. We have children growing up in low-income neighborhoods in Los Angeles where some of them are not getting the moral teachings that I got. And then there are those who are, but we are also in a county where there's no fear of the police or prosecution. So the two things that kept me on the path toward working and an education are not in place in Los Angeles right now. And we need to change that.
Do you think the collapse of the family have also been the root of crime? You have conservative pundits. We had as our guest, Larry Elder, who's running for United States presidential race. He talks about this a lot. It's especially among the African American community.
Right.
That
So
has
home family
caused a lot.
education, how much of a part does this play, do you think?
It's a huge part. And I've heard Mr. Elder and others talk about the breakdown of the two-parent household for African Americans, and it's also growing among other demographics as well. But for African Americans, it's been a big problem. 70% of our children, 7 out of 10, are growing up in single-parent households. Now, that's how I grew up. So it's possible to grow up that way and go on and do good things in life. You can even have an extraordinary life because a single parent, whether it be a man or a woman, can do the job of both. But nothing really replaces having two parents, especially if it's a healthy home environment. And it's a big problem that's plagued the African American family for a long time. And how do we address that? No one has addressed it in almost 50 years. It wasn't always this way. If you go back to the end of slavery, right through to about 1960, the rate of two-parent households for blacks was nearly the same as it was for whites. Some bad things happened in the 1960s to the black family. And, the pundits debate what those bad things were. A lot of those programs and policies were well-intended, but they had really negative consequences.
How old was your eldest sister? The year gap between you and your eldest sister, I wanted to know.
Yeah, my sister is 29 years older than I am.
29 years older.
Yes.
Okay, so she was like a mom.
She was already playing the role of a surrogate mom because I was being raised by my father, who was a truck driver, who was sometimes away from home for a day or two. So my sister was already filling in that role when he passed away. It was a natural transition for me to be with her. I had already looked up to her as a parent.
You still call her a mom? Is she still
I call her my sister.
Okay.
Except when I want to make her cry, then I call her mom and she just starts crying.
I wanted to ask you that. You said this. Seemingly overnight, a neighborhood became a hood.
Yes.
Seemingly overnight, many hardworking and respected men and women became crack-addicted zombies. Why did this happen overnight?
That's the power of crack cocaine. Crack cocaine is such a powerful drug, and unlike anything our cities had seen before, turned these neighborhoods upside down overnight. And, there were men and women who were, Mr. Smith and Mrs. Johnson, who I'd looked up to for years, who all of a sudden were walking around the neighborhood. Husbands were pimping out their wives for a little rock cocaine.
Man, that's crazy.
It was nuts. And so what felt like a neighborhood up to that point, kids played outside. We played in the park. We played sports. Older people looked out for kids that were neighbors. Like, for example, my sister worked nights. So when I got home from school, my sister wasn't home. I was like a latchkey kid, expected to kind of police myself. But there were always neighbors also looking out. So let's say I had friends over. Mrs. Johnson from next door would say, "Hey, John, Does your sister know you had company after school?
It's like the village raising a child.
Exactly. Everybody looked out for each other. And then crack hit the street, and it's like a dark cloud came over the community. It changed forever.
So when you look back, it happened like within like a couple months. When you look back, you know, the climate of the neighborhood.
It feels that way. But it probably was a little more gradual. And then one day my eyes opened to what happened.
It's like you wake up and you're like,
right.
wow.
But it happened fast.
It's like Los Angeles, right? Like with the fentanyl crisis. Do you see some similarities?
I do.
There?
Well, LA actually had the same similar crack issue in South Central, starting with Watts, Inglewood included, as well as Compton. Some of them were hit harder than others, but I think it was like a phenomenon that occurred just simultaneously.
Yes.
Once it hit the streets. It was just like that, got everyone hooked, and everything. Before they knew it, everyone was a crack addict, and there was crime everywhere, and gangs controlling these areas.
That's
I
right.
remember those times. I mean, what motivated you? How did you survive through all of this? That's, you know.
Well, you know, it wasn't easy. We already talked about the two things that really kept
You're
me
right,
from
you're right.
engaging.
How about academia?
But there's crime all around the crack sales distribution. There's prostitution, there's robberies, there's murders that take place. Now, the one thing that made it a little easier for me than it was for my counterparts out here is we didn't have the gang problem back east
then,
that you have here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you are already having gang wars, and then crack cocaine fueled those and made it worse. We didn't have much of a gang problem at all back east. It was just guys running to New York, buying wholesale, coming back to northern New Jersey and selling it for a profit. It wasn't as organized as it was here. Still, you know, you just know where it's happening. So if you go into that area, you're kind of asking for trouble because you know what goes on there. Now, I also had a couple friends who were selling drugs who always thought that I had a chance to be something special.
Oh, okay.
And they made sure that if they were dirty, that's what we used to say, when they had drugs on them or nearby, they wouldn't acknowledge me in any way. So if I saw my friend and said, hey, he would just keep going. And I would know, oh, he's dirty.
And they're protecting you.
They're protecting
some of these guys are just like people like you and me,
Right.
You know, just trying to make a living.
Were you good at school? You know, when did you start working too? You know, I want to.
I tested very well in school, but I was a great underachiever. You know, at some point in elementary school, I kind of lost interest. I lost that intellectual curiosity. I started getting into sports and music, and I stayed that way right through high school. I did well on the tests, but I didn't do well on my studies.
So you could have done better.
I could have.
You worked at Pfizer too, and you said that was kind of like a culture shock. You know, that's our show's title actually. You had some kind of culture shock.
Oh
there.
yeah, I took a lot of. So here's my history. Right after high school, I went to college for a year. I didn't want to go, but my sister wanted me to go. It was kind of her dream that I would go. So consequently, I didn't do very well because I wasn't into it. I quit. And when I quit, I was 19 years old. My sister came to me and said, so when are you moving out?
Since you're over 18, you know.
Yeah.
I said,
that's how it was back in those days.
I said, what do you mean? She said, well, you work now, right? I said, yes. She said, so when are you moving out? I couldn't believe it. I thought she was joking, but she was serious. And what she said to me is, look, I was here for you as long as you were in school. But since you quit and you want to be a man, you want to work, it's time for you to leave.
You had a good sister, really good
Oh,
sister.
my goodness. It turned out to be the best thing for me because I did leave. I said to her, she said, it's time to leave the nest. I said, what if I can't fly? She said, you'll be fine. I moved out at 19. I never went back.
Oh, great.
And I got a little room in a rooming house, $90 a week for the room, and just carried on from there. But I took a lot of jobs after that, including a job at Pfizer. This is before Pfizer got popular, you know, for their popular drug that they
Before
have
they
now.
became the big pharma? Okay.
But their warehouse was exquisite. Now, I had other warehouse jobs before, but this place was so organized and so clean, I couldn't believe it. You could eat off the floor. And I said in my bio,
Yes, I read that part.
if I had money, I knew that this is a special company. If I had money, I would have invested in Pfizer. And you know, maybe I wouldn't be sitting here if I had those resources.
And how about your transition from Jersey to LA? How did you come, how did you drop here?
It's surreal. I grew up 26 years in the same city I was born in. No intention of ever leaving or going too far away from home. I was a homebody. I enrolled at a law school in New Jersey, not far from where I was living.
Yeah, you're
Had
right.
no intention of coming here.
So you did decide to go back to school.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did.
After that year that I quit,
Mm-hmm.
I went to work for 2 years, and then that intellectual curiosity that I told you I lost
It came
somewhere along
back.
the line, it came back.
Why did that come back?
Yeah, what hit that?
I
Just
don't
out of the
know.
blue?
It just came out of the blue. I found myself, I started listening to talk radio.
Okay.
Talk radio
There was some big cases going on in New York City involving police violence, and I just found myself getting into it, reading
So
the
that sparked
newspaper.
it. Police
and
violence and also
social justice issues really got me
There you
thinking
go.
more critically, and eventually led me back to college.
okay.
And then from college to law school. Now, what brought me here was UCLA. I attended the UCLA School of Law, really against every fiber in my being, because I had no intention of coming out here to LA.
So you really didn't want to come, in
I
a way.
didn't.
Well,
I
what was your
didn't.
impression of LA before you came? I mean, what were you
It
thinking?
was scary. It was nuts.
Like gangs?
The 1992 riots,
Yeah.
the Rodney King beating before the riots, mudslides, earthquakes, gang violence.
All the negative
We
stuff.
we
right?
saw all that on our televisions back east.
So it's a different world, right?
Why would anybody want to go to Los Angeles? And I believe in free will. I believe in we make choices. But when it comes to how I got here, I'm open to the idea that there are other forces that kind of nudge us a little bit.
It's a divine calling.
Yeah, probably.
And
And UCLA Law School was one of the top ones back then, right?
Yeah.
And
Right,
that's-
top 20
that
law
motiva-
school.
Still
yeah,
now.
it still is, and
Yeah.
and especially back then, and that motivated you to come here as well, right?
that's right. That's right.
And how did it go? The law school, was it good?
It was a culture shock.
That was a culture
Right.
shock.
I grew up in Passaic, New Jersey, low income neighborhood my whole life. All the black people that I knew, all the Hispanic people that I knew grew up just like me, pretty low income. I got to UCLA for the first time in my life. I was around upper middle class and wealthy people,
The area is
black
Westwood,
and
too.
Hispanic,
Yeah,
and in
right,
Westwood.
yeah.
So it was different. I had to adjust, and it's a little bit scary because, these are people who grew up with the best education. They all spoke proper. I still am struggling to catch up because when you grow up in the hood, you learn a lot of informal English,
I
a
understand
lot
what
of slang and conjugating verbs. Nobody really cares, so you don't care. But when I got to UCLA, it was just a completely different and much more rigorous intellectual environment. Some really bright people, and you wonder, did I bite off more than I can chew? But after a while in being there, I realized that the ceiling for me was a lot higher than I thought. And in a short period of time, I think I closed that gap and fit right in.
Why did you choose your career on the prosecutor side, not on the defense
I was
attorney?
open to both. When I finished law school, I knew I wanted to go into criminal law. I didn't really have a preference one way or another. If anything, I might have been leaning more to the defense side.
Oh, really?
Because I had watched my friends get arrested over the years. And I thought,
wanted
if
to
I
defend
become a
them.
lawyer, maybe I could go back home and represent people like them.
I wanted to ask you a question. During your time when you were in UCLA, this was like the
90s?
mid-90s, right?
Mid-90s.
That's
Around
right.
there. Was there racism that you felt around you, whether it was a little bit of prejudice that you felt or a little nudge here and there, a joke or two? That someone
There
tried
were
to-
a couple of incidents on campus, but for the most part, UCLA was a very welcoming environment. There were a couple of isolated incidents. I don't know if you'll recall, you guys are a little young for this, but during the mid-90s, Proposition 209 was debated and passed. It's Proposition 209, which outlawed the use of affirmative action in education
sure. Yeah,
in
yeah,
California,
yeah.
was being
We talked about it.
debated while I was in law school. So it was a polarizing issue
I
that
vaguely
brought out
recall.
some ugliness on both sides. So my law school years were very interesting. My first year of law school, O.J. Simpson was on trial.
I watched
That's
that
right.
every
That's
day
right.
on CNN.
So
I watched it every day.
I had criminal law.
It's right around the neighborhood, too.
And I go home and there's a whole trial playing out. Everything I'm learning in class is playing out in real life. So it was an interesting time to be in law school.
Okay, so you went to LA County District Attorney's Office, right after you graduated, right?
Yes.
And what did you do? What part did you specialize in?
All DAs start off the same way. We all start off in misdemeanors.
Misdemeanors, yeah.
Yeah. So you're prosecuting DUIs, trespass, loitering, vandalism, those kinds of cases, because they're low stakes. If you mess them up, it's not the end of the world. And most of us do that for about a year or a year and a half. Back then, after a year and a half, you go to juvenile court, where now you're dealing with serious felony cases committed by juveniles. Again, if you mess up, it's not the same as messing up an adult felony case. And so now you get experience with these more serious crimes. From there, you go to an adult felony assignment, which I did. Now, where my career started to really take off is when I got out of juvenile, I got accepted into this special program of prosecuting child abuse and sexual assault, adult sexual assault, elder abuse, those kinds of cases. Most people will know them as special victims unit type cases. I did that for 3 years. Then I went to the hardcore gang division, where I was for 6 years, prosecuting almost all gang-related murders. Some other shootings, attempted murders, but mostly murders. And then the major crimes division, where we prosecute the most complex and high-profile cases in Los Angeles County. And I was there for over 10 years.
Dealing with murders, just a side question, dealing with murders and stuff on a daily basis for almost nearly a decade, seeing sexual assaults and stuff, it must kind of play a toll on your mental state.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know if I said it in the bio or not, but I have said to people over the years that with the murder cases, at least the way that I prosecute them, because I really like to get into the case, into the victim, who the victim was, you leave a little piece of yourself behind.
You did write it there, yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I first started, and I loved being a trial attorney. So an old timer said to me, he said, "Young man, every lawyer only has so many trials in them." And I didn't know what that meant, because I thought I could do this forever. It's a great job. You're doing the right thing. You're helping people. You're performing a little bit in front of a jury. You're teaching, all the great things that really appealed to me.
But it drains you.
But as I got older and really close to my last trial, which was the Nipsey Hussle case, I understand what he meant. It took a lot of years for me to get there, but you do leave, at least when you really... when you take the cases to heart, and I mean, we befriend the families, we become friends of the family.
And you see the trauma they go through.
I still get invited to cookouts and birthdays for victims' families. It takes a toll, and you have to learn how to compartmentalize it so that you can leave work and have a normal life too. But it's always up there.
The work box stays shut.
Yeah.
So do you think a lot of prosecutors, they also do therapy because of these
I think
things? I read it from novels and all that, but I'm wondering.
I think some do. It's an emerging focus on prosecutors' health, police officers' health, or any workers really that deal with trauma. Paramedics deal with a lot of trauma.
Surgeons as well. I mean,
Yeah.
I would imagine.
Oh, yeah. Since you dealt with child sex crime, I was wondering, did you watch the recent movie Sound of Freedom?
Oh, I didn't see it yet.
But you know the story
It's
about it.
on my list to see it.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Oh, it's on your list.
I know the subject matter.
Yeah, and I think that lasted, that gave me a lasting, impression about these crimes. What are the other crimes that you other than the ones that you elaborated? What are the other ones that you focused on?
Yeah, well, I've prosecuted every type of violent crime there is. Now, my career is a little unique as compared to a lot of DAs because I got started prosecuting violent crimes early. And so 22 of my 25 years was spent prosecuting serious and violent felonies.
And what's impressive is you convicted every suspect, right? That was on your...
I had one felony that I lost in my career.
Oh, you had one felony?
One.
Oh, okay.
Well, what was it like dealing with a case as big as, because you mentioned O.J. Simpson, right? But Nipsey Hussle. I own a restaurant in Inglewood, And I know how big Nipsey is. On his funeral, there was a huge parade for him in memorial of him. The area that he owns, where he used to own the shopping center in there, that area is always blocked off, and there's nice murals on the side in memory of him as well. What was it like for you to actually get in and deal with a trial like Nipsey Hussle?
I did a lot of big cases, but none that the public was more interested in than that case. Now, I also prosecuted the death of Shinran G.
Oh, that one I wanted to talk about.
That was also
it's kind of like
a very big case.
Was that like an Asian hate crime situation back in the day, or
It was a robbery. He was targeted not because he was Chinese, but because he was alone and vulnerable. But there was some conversation about him being Chinese by the perpetrators in the car, but not in a hateful way. It wasn't such that we could charge a hate crime on
So
it.
like it was like a passing reference calling him something along the lines, but that wasn't what motivated the killings.
That's
is what
right.
you're saying.
It was a group of teens,
if
right?
if there was a diminutive African American walking with his backpack, they would have hit him. If there was a white, it would have hit him. They were looking for a vulnerable victim, and he was walking alone. He's a relatively small guy, had his backpack on, and they thought, easy mark right here. Let's just go get his backpack, take his money. And it went horribly awry after that.
yeah, engineering student from China, right?
Brilliant young man.
And China had a only one child policy, so the parents
right.
lost their only kid, and which is a very tragic
They
situation.
did have that one
Yeah.
child
Yeah,
policy.
they had the one child policy. His parents were older at this point, so there's no chance of having another child.
This happened around USC,
Yes,
right? Back in 2014.
2014.
And they were a group of members between age of 15 to 19. These spoiled brats, right? Who did this?
Well, I wouldn't call them spoiled. They were criminals. They had already, even at that early age, become very antisocial. Even the 16-year-old girl was probably the leader, even though she wasn't
16-year-old girl.
Yeah, she wasn't the oldest person in the car. The oldest person was the 19-year-old. He was actually the softest one in the car. He was not a shot caller, even though he was the older one, which is not uncommon. A lot of people think, oh, the older person is the most responsible all the time. Not in LA, not in this day and age. This 16-year-old girl was the shot caller. There was another one in the car, 18-year-old, who was right there with her, and they did the most damage in the attack. Just heartbreaking because, again, the young man was extraordinarily gifted, working on new discoveries in engineering, and also had a very creative side too. He was an excellent photographer, so it was a rare blend.
So you got to really know who he was.
Yeah, and again, that's how I tend to operate. In the family, I met with the family several times.
You even put his picture there, actually, in your bio.
Oh, I did. Yeah. And it's not uncommon for me to have a victim's picture around me. Even in my home, sometimes I'll have a picture like on the refrigerator when I'm working on a case. It just reminds me to get to work sometimes, sometimes when I might watch TV or go play golf or do something else, I go to the refrigerator, I see the picture, and I'm like, oh, you got to work on that.
His parents were here, or were they in mainland China?
Mainland China.
They were in mainland China.
They
so he was a
came
foreign
out.
student.
They came out right after the killing, and I met with them the day they arrived. And it was the saddest room I had ever been in my life. And I've been in some sad rooms. I went to my father's funeral at 5 years old. I didn't quite know what was going on, and that was a sad room. Yeah. This room, as an adult, I met his father. His father was just hollowed out. He was there physically, but you could see right through him. His mother, on the other hand, was angry, and she was spitting fire in that room. It was one of the most emotional environments I had ever been in.
How did it end up for the defendants? What kind of charge? What were they charged? I mean, what was their? What were they given?
They were all charged with murder. 3 of the 4 were charged with first-degree murder with special circumstances. The driver was charged with first-degree murder, but we pled him out to a second-degree murder, and I can tell you why. But the three main people were all convicted and all sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, which for juveniles or anybody under 26 doesn't really mean life without parole. They'll all get an opportunity at a parole hearing. The driver, we pled to a lesser charge because we gathered from the facts that he never intended for anybody to get hurt. He was in it for the robbery, but when he saw the attack, he actually left. He stopped the attack because he drove off, and when they saw him leaving, they ran after the car. Okay, what a lot of people forget about the crime is after they attacked Shinron, they went to Dockweiler State Beach, and they attacked another couple with the same baseball bat that they used on Shinron. Before that second attack happened, the driver said to the group, "I don't want any part of this." He was still shaken up by what he saw earlier. So for those reasons, we allowed him to plead to a lesser charge than the other three. Still murder, but a lesser charge.
We see a lot. Have the rate of crimes and violent crimes from back then, has it gone down in your opinion or by the stats that you see?
Well, when I started in the DA's office, violent crime in LA was about 200% higher than it is today. And from the mid 90s to about 2014, 15, crime dropped every
Dramatically,
year.
right?
Dramatically. Even through the Great Recession, which, conventional wisdom is when we go through bad economic times and high unemployment, crime increases. That's been disproven a couple times now in our history, including during the Great Recession. Crime just kept going down.
What was the reason for that?
Well, I can tell you the reason. In the mid-90s, California passed the Anti-Gang Enhancement Act that prosecuted gang-related violence. California passed the Three Strikes Law that targeted career criminals.
Do you support three strikes law?
I do.
You do.
I support the new version of the law. The original version was flawed, which led to some bizarre prosecutions where people are stealing minor things and getting life sentences. That's because the way that law was written, the third strike could be any felony. We changed that. So the third strike, like the first two, have to be serious or violent felonies. And judges have discretion still to not impose a life sentence if the judge thinks it's not appropriate. So we have sufficient safeguards in place now that I think that it is a good law. And it's intertwined with some other laws that would cause great injustices if we ever got rid of it. And then we had this gun enhancement law called the 1020 Life Law that targeted people that use guns in violent felonies. Not any felony, but violent ones. Those are the three laws that brought the violent crime rate down. Now, a lot of sociologists and criminologists won't credit those laws. They will credit community policing or anything else they can find. But it was the tough on crime laws that got at the tough criminals.
So you're also a proponent of tough on crime laws, right?
I am, as long as they're used proportionally.
I also agree that, some small crimes, people going to prison over very small crimes and first-time offenses, they end up coming out of prison a lot worse than they were when they went in. So I agree that we need to keep some people out for certain things. But at this point, do you agree with me when I say that there's a problem of people committing crimes everywhere without consequence?
Like smash and grab?
Absolutely. So we talked about how the crime rate went down until 2015, 16 or so. Now it's going back up.
So Jackie.
So the violent crime as well is going back up.
Yes.
So Jackie Lacey, LA County District Attorney, the former one, was she good?
She was good, yeah.
Okay.
She was good.
I just wanted to ask you that. Okay. Anyway, you were explaining.
I've worked for 4 DAs. 3 of them have been good. The one we have now, Mr. Gascon, is not good.
Okay.
We can go into why, but
Yeah, I'd like to get into why.
I mean, you were answering his question, sorry. But from 2014, it started going back up. And the reason is?
The reason is we have a brand of criminal justice reform that's making it easier for criminals to commit crime.
Who's starting all that movement? Who's starting all this?
It started about 10 years ago, but it started to culminate in and around 2016, 2015, 2016 or so. So it's not just one person and it's not coming from one place, but our California legislature is passing a lot of bad laws. We have a court system now that's adopted this idea of zero bail and no detentions between the time of arrest and arraignment for some criminals.
I'm wondering why these movement came about. So many people have been talking about George Soros too, that he's been funding all these, liberal, crazy idea prosecutors.
Right.
And these people get elected because he's funded by this big money, and you can't match that with other candidates. I don't think he's supporting your campaign, for instance. So is that one of the reasons why? Because that's how I see it.
Yeah, it's a movement, and I've tried to explain it. And sometimes when you try to explain things that don't make sense, you sound like you don't make sense. So I'm a little cautious to try to explain it. But it really comes out of the whole idea of mass incarceration, right? So there was a movement in some popular literature and documentaries about how the prison system is being used as the new Jim Crow or way of subjugating minorities.
So making like a racism thing.
Right. And they point to the high conviction rates and high prison population for minorities, especially African Americans, that make up a small percentage of the population, but a fairly large percentage of people in prison. And based on those realities, they conclude that the court system, law enforcement is all racist. What they don't do is look at the crime that is actually being committed and who is committing it. Because if they went that far back, they would understand why the prison population is what it is. But they gloss over who's committing the crime and only focus on the institutions of justice and scapegoat our court system for those outcomes. Well, who is that helpful for? How is that ever going to solve the real problem?
That's true.
Because our court systems are not the problem. Whatever bias might exist in policing, and there is some, whatever bias might exist in our court system, and you'd have to be naive to think there is none, it doesn't explain why so many African Americans and Hispanics are convicted of crime. I mean, if you assumed a certain measure of bias in a system, it wouldn't explain those numbers. What explains those numbers is who's committing the crime in the first place. So we have to get at that. We have to go upstream and figure out why so many African-American young men, and it's not most, it's a small percentage,
Yes.
but they're active and they're aggressive and they drive a lot of crime. Same is true for Hispanics. And if we ever want to bring down the amount of crime that's taking place, the number of victims, the arrests, convictions, imprisonments, if we want to bring all those numbers down, and we should, we've got to deal with the real problem at its source and not scapegoat, not decriminalize behavior that should be criminal. Because that's kind of what's happening today. You got a district attorney in Gascon who just won't prosecute crime.
He wouldn't.
His thinking is, if we want fewer black people to be convicted of crime, let's not even try the cases. Let's not file the cases. How is that a solution? Because the behavior then increases. And that behavior is not good for the person doing it, and it's not good for his family, and it's not good for his community.
Yeah.
And that really angers me, because when I think about who I was as a young black kid watching the crack cocaine epidemic happen, if I had a district attorney like George Gascon who would have excused it, I probably would have been out there. And if I had gone out there, I wouldn't be here talking to you right now in a position to run for district attorney.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen to that, really.
And George Gascon was sitting right over there, and he was blaming like the court system, the legal system, and the court judges. They recommend using psychologists and all this stuff, but it sounded like ridiculous excuse. What do you think about that?
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. There is actual crime happening. We see it on our phones, on our television sets. We read about it. It's happening. We have to deal with that. But you need leadership that's courageous enough to talk about that. There are a lot of elected officials and some people running for DA who will sit here and talk about reform and accountability, but they won't tell you what I just told you. that there is a problem, a pathological problem with a small percentage of Black and Hispanic young men who are driving like 75-80% of the violent crime in Los Angeles right now. That is a fact. And if you really care about those young people who are committing that crime and their victims, you've got to admit that, and you've got to be ready to deal with it. And as district attorney, of course, I'll hold people accountable when they commit crime. But the real intriguing challenge for me is to get upstream to those young men before they become antisocial. Yeah. Fourth graders, fifth graders, sixth graders, we have to really focus on them and keep them on a straight path.
So he's your boss, right?
Yes.
George Gascon is your boss. And I think there has been numerous reports that he purposely put you in like small court cases so that you can't block his whatever crazy agenda that he's putting out there.
Disfavoritism.
Yeah, he retaliated against me. I was in the Major Crimes Division, which is the highest perch in the DA's office, especially for a trial lawyer. And I was there for 10 years. And historically, once you're there until you choose to go somewhere else. But after I prosecuted the Nipsey Hussle case, I got a fair amount of attention and publicity, especially from the Black community, which he considers his base. I don't know how much you follow him, but he's always trying to wrap himself in the experience of African Americans, which he knows nothing about. Once he saw that, I think it frightened him. And so he transferred me out of major crimes and put me in East LA.
Yeah,
so he sees you as a threat.
He's a Cuban guy. He doesn't know African American stories. And there was a lawsuit. Didn't you file a lawsuit against?
I did not sue.
You did not?
And the reason I didn't sue, and I've said this, and I'm not criticizing people who have brought lawsuits, because sometimes the lawsuit is the only way to deal with somebody like him and hold him accountable. So I didn't do it because I'm running for DA. I want the public to give me his job, not their money.
Okay.
That's what I want.
All right.
So you have my vote, definitely, from what you said. I mean, I want to say that you do have a lot of courage, because everything that you said and everything that you're standing for are things that people is the things that people think but don't really say, right? And to go against the grain like that, I think it takes a lot of courage, and to come out in California and talk about these things about your boss as well and go against him. I give you a lot of credit for that. Can we change things around? I mean, do you think we can change things around in a short matter of time, or are we going to be headed towards becoming something like San Francisco or Portland, Oregon, or some of those places for the time being?
Well, we can change things, and we will change things. It won't happen overnight. It's a lot easier to tear things down than it is to build them back up. And he's done a lot of damage to the organization of the DA's office itself. I mean, one thing that I would have to do as the next DA is to hire 200 new deputy DAs. We don't have enough lawyers to cover the county right now, and he's not hiring them because he doesn't care.
How many prosecutors right now in the county?
We're right around 800 right
800,
now,
but
and we should be over 1,000.
We should be over 1,000. Okay.
One of his excuses was that there's not enough staff and that there's too many people.
He said that.
Maybe to keep that kind of narrative going, that he's hiring less when he actually can. Is that the case?
Well, he is, because he's only hired about 50 people in his first 3 years. And typically a DA will hire 100 to 125 people a year. You almost have to keep up with attrition. So he is purposely, I think, I don't have hard evidence of it, but circumstantially you can conclude that he's starving the office of necessary resources.
Think that's by design.
And that's
by design.
Consistent with his desire to see cases either not get prosecuted or get dismissed, which is what's happening.
Was he always that liberal, George Gascon? You knew about him, right? Even back in the day.
I knew that he was assistant chief or deputy chief at LAPD, but I didn't know much about him. I know that he did quite well at LAPD under Daryl Gates, and we all know the history of Daryl Gates. He was no friend to the minority communities in LA. And if you do well under his administration, maybe that says something about you, your politics, or not. I don't know. he left LAPD when he didn't get the job of chief. He went to Mesa, Arizona, and then San Francisco again as a police officer, not as a lawyer. He did pick up a law degree along the way, but I think he picked up his law degree to advance in the police department because that's a nice thing to have if you want to get promoted. He never intended to practice law, and to this day has never practiced law, which is just stunning that somebody would be appointed the district attorney of San Francisco when they've never practiced a day in their life. You talk about privilege. Could you imagine?
I know, and many people now consider him like this monster, you know. I mean, he was here, he looks like a nice guy, gentleman, you know, and all that, but I just didn't understand a former LAPD officer, you know, change all of a sudden to this uber liberal county district attorney, and he was just telling us, you know, excuses after excuses, and
blaming other people,
blaming the system, blaming the situation,
the
and all that.
population,
you know? And even I mentioned about this Dalton Lee situation. I don't know whether you know about this. This came out on LA Times report last year on May. And okay, so Dalton Lee, I'll just read parts of it. So I want to know what you think about this.
Okay.
So Dalton Lee, he was. This is on May 5th last year. He was sitting in his work van outside his South LA laundromat when a man came up behind him and stabbed him in the neck.
Yes,
you know
I know the case.
Yeah, right?
I spoke to his daughter about the incident as well. So what did he have to say about that? Because he
blamed the system. He said, you know, and there was another case
because he didn't charge a hate crime there, right? Although there was evidence that this particular person had stabbed another person or attempted to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like on April 30th, you know, a 20-year-old mathematics student from Shanghai, you know, he was also about to get stabbed around USC. So it was a very similar situation. But so they recommended, the campus police recommended the DA's office to charge him, but they dropped the charge. And then the next day, Dalton Lee got stabbed and died, you know. And what do you think about this case?
It's
two cases.
It's horrific. You know, like I said, I did speak to his daughter about it, and I couldn't believe that our office didn't charge Mr. Lee's death properly. But, you know, this is a DA who doesn't believe in hate crimes. The moment he got sworn in, he said, I will no longer prosecute hate crimes. He thought it was illegitimate to prosecute a hate crime. And it wasn't until some of his supporters in the Jewish community and the LGBTQ community and African-American groups said, hey, whoa. What do you mean you're not going to do hate crimes? He pulled it back.
Because hate crime is a liberal kind of cause too, right?
Right.
In a way,
it was kind of stunning that he, of all
but
the
he was
things
going
that he
against
said,
the
I'm
grain
not
in a
going to
way.
do.
Yeah.
Right. But he did that across the board. Like he had a very anti-victim agenda. It's a very pro-perpetrator agenda.
That's a very correct way to, you know, describe George Gascon. Anti-victim, you said?
Yeah.
Anti-victim
he has no
agenda.
empathy. Did that come across in your conversation with him? Well, I don't want to put you on the spot. I've seen him talk many times, and it's clear he has no empathy for people.
Seems like so.
He was given an agenda by people who supported him. This is our wish list. And he has been trying to deliver on as many of those promises as he could. One of which apparently was get rid of hate crimes, which is stunning.
So all these votes, though, I mean, Gascon, he was voted in. Gavin Newsom's voted in. Well, all these people are voted in, right? Now, when I talk to my neighbor, when I talk to the people around me, they all feel the same way. They all have the same opinion.
All the people that I talk with, too.
And when I see the policies that these guys are pushing and the recalls that I've been trying to push as well, and, you know, I've been a part of, which never worked out, never pans out for some reason, and I wonder, do people know what's going on? Do you get a consensus of people that they're catching on to what's going on and that they really want change? Do you see an increase in that opinion?
I do. You know, I've been speaking out from really the primary with Jackie Lacey back in 2020. The mayor of San Francisco, where he was the DA, wrote an open letter to Los Angeles and took out an ad in the LA Times warning the voters not to vote for the guy. So information about him, his track record up in San Francisco was all public. Still he won. and a lot of other politicians in the assembly and the state senate and on city councils who believe the same kind of magical thinking that if you don't hold people accountable, they will somehow be more responsible. And there's no logic to it at all. But having been out there talking for 3 years now through the first failed recall and then the second failed recall,
Yeah.
I have seen the anti-Gascon sentiment grow steadily over that period of time.
I mean,
And,
yeah.
I think about 70% of the electorate right now is an anti-Gascon electorate. And, I don't think a lot of those people hate him personally, although some do. Like you said, he sat
course it
here, he
goes that
seemed
way,
affable, he seemed like a nice enough man. I, in fact, have never met him personally, believe it or not.
No, but the way he talks, he's not really that articulate, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he's clear when he talks. It's kind of a little bit mumbling, to be
Well,
honest with you.
and
That's how I
part of it
saw
is he's probably not confident in what he's talking about because he didn't put in his 10,000 hours in this craft.
Mm-hmm.
He was never educated or trained to be a prosecutor. He just was literally handed the job. And it's hard to start at the top when you haven't worked your way up and earned your way to the top.
Your boss is a guy who's never prosecuted a single case.
Right. So how does he sit in the room with somebody like me?
I mean, it really tells how much of, LA County constituents, I think constituents are stupid. I mean, I'll just flat out say it. I think many constituents are stupid. They're brainwashed by the media, and they just vote, pull down the same lever over and over again and expect to change. Nothing's going to change. And you have LA Times, which is a prominent paper. They endorsed George Gascon. They were against his recall. And I had a conversation with Jackie Lacey actually about this. And Jackie Lacey, what she told me is she thinks, like people like George Soros, he even buys these reporters. That's what she told me, and so this whole system is against common sense and just they're pro-crime, anti-victim.
Well, that's why I'm appealing to people. And I'm pleased to be here with you because I know that this is going to go directly to people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going through the organizations or, they exist and you have to talk to them.
Or the PAC people.
But we've got to get to voters and educate voters about the system. There are a lot of myths about the criminal justice system that people believe. They think our jails are filled with young people smoking weed, and that hasn't been true in the 25 years that I've been a prosecutor, yet people still believe that's true.
The media keeps reporting it like that.
Reporting it. It's absurd. It hasn't been true. I don't know if it's ever been true, but it hasn't been true as long as I've been in jail.
I thought it was true.
Do you believe if the George Floyd incident, have it not happened, the crime rate wouldn't be as right now? Some people have been, pinpointing that was the exact incident.
Maybe
where
that was the
happened, and then that
incident
really instigated a
Caused
whole
like
wave
a
of
butterfly
crime.
effect.
Yeah, it's interesting because I thought you were going to ask me, did I think but for George Floyd, Jackie Lacey would have got elected? My answer
I think
to that
Jackie Lacey would have been
question is
elected. You're right.
Yes.
Yep.
Gascon benefited from that.
Uh-huh.
Undoubtedly, COVID has had an impact on crime.
Okay.
It was hard to see when we were in the midst of COVID, and sometimes with crime is studied and understood years after the period, right? So, but I think we're far enough away from COVID now to understand that COVID did have an impact on the crime rates going up. But there are usually many variables that affect the crime rate. And sometimes you have a perfect storm. So you have something like COVID happen that society doesn't even know how to respond to, and we're kind of groping in the dark. Then you get a district attorney who doesn't believe in criminal accountability, who supports zero bail, who supports not charging crime, reducing sentences even before people are properly reformed and rehabilitated, won't prosecute any juveniles as adults even when they commit murder. When you combine that mentality and those policies with something like COVID, you get what we got, which was a alarming spike in crime after years of decline.
Mm-hmm.
So he's contributing to the problem. I wouldn't lay every crime that occurs at his feet, but he has created an atmosphere for it, and he has created policies that allow for it.
And you talked about that all prosecutors should experience in a juvenile court.
Yes.
You know, that was a very huge experience for you, and you highly recommend every prosecutor to
Right.
experience that. Why is that?
Gil Garcetti changed the DA policy. It used to be optional whether a DA wanted to do juvenile or not. And Gil Garcetti believed that every prosecutor should see how some of our young people are living and see the choices and conditions in which they're living that lead to what we see later in adult court. That would create more empathy and understanding and better inform how we handle the adult cases. And I think that was very wise on his part. Now, when I was in juvenile court, I saw a lot of what was already familiar to me because I grew up like a lot of the kids that were coming through the juvenile court. And when I looked over at them, I wasn't like a rich black kid who grew up, in Beverly Hills or West LA someplace. I was looking at somebody that looked like me or my best friend or my cousin. So for me, it wasn't, I didn't feel the kind of sympathy that I saw in other prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges.
They were too harsh or too...
They were too lenient
So he's
because
saying
they
that he
were
was like,
operating out of
I did
guilt. They needed the opposite of what they were getting from the court. They needed structure. They needed discipline. They needed goals. They didn't need somebody to say, "Oh, poor you."
I mean, these kids you're talking
You're
about,
growing
right?
up with a single parent. Go home.
out and do it again.
Right.
Because that's easier to listen, right? Isn't it kind of more softer and sweeter
It makes them feel good.
Yeah, it
when
makes
they
them feel
send
good.
the kid home
Less guilty.
with no consequences.
He's got that tough love mentality.
But it's
dude.
not good for the young man. Because think about it. By the time they end up in juvenile court, they've already had other experiences where they got caught doing bad things. Now they're in court.
Yeah.
And they're expecting to see a judge. Okay. And that's a big deal. You see them come into court for the first time, the eyes are open. And then they get sent home with no consequences. Oh, that wasn't so bad.
Yeah.
And then they go home with street cred because they've been arrested and they've been to court.
Yo, I just got out of jail, man.
You can be a good hip hop star, right?
And
with
then,
that credit.
And then they violate probation and they come back. And guess what the judge does?
Let him go again.
He sends them home again.
John, how can our viewers help your campaign, your cause to go against
we get a little bar to come
George
out
Gascon? I think your story, if you win this race, I think it's going to be made like a movie, made a movie. How can our viewers help you out?
Let's let the viewers know.
Okay.
Bar right there.
Thank you for the opportunity to say this. I can use help in a number of ways. Number one, you can follow me on social media. My website is McKinney4LA.com. That's McKinney4LA.com. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at John McKinney _ John McKinney _ Now, I can't be successful without you. I need your help. I need your contributions, both funding, anything you can give, $10, $20, $50, whatever you can do to help me with funding, because I need to hire people to help me to get the message out. We've got to reach 10 million people in LA County. We've got to mail things out. We got to put digital ads out, and that all costs money. But beyond that, I can also use your help as a volunteer. We have a way on the website for you to sign up to be a volunteer, to come out to our events. We're having a phone banking event today. In fact, right after I leave here, we're going to go across town where we're going to meet some volunteers and make phone calls for the rest of the afternoon. So I need help in that way. And then just word of mouth. Tell your parents. If you're a parent, tell your children, tell your cousins. Just talk about the campaign, talk about John McKinney, and that'll help me.
All right, thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
That's it
Appreciate
for us. Bye-bye, everybody.
Goodbye, everyone. Make the right choice.